the recording for these last 5 minutes of class setup. Okay, so basically after we have meiosis happen, all right, so we have these separate options ending up in those gametes. During sexual reproduction, gametes combine, so we get back to the diploid state and we have 2 copies of a trait again. And this is how we end up with inheritance. So back when they first discovered the principles of inheritance, they defined this as being like kind of particles of inheritance, but we now understand that what's happening is that every organism has 2 basically copies of a gene, right, in a diploid organism. So that's what our homologous pair is. So we have these genes and we have 2 copies that may have different versions or different alleles. And that when these traits go to get expressed in offspring or in organisms, in living organisms, we have a set of rules that tells us what trait we will actually see, right? Okay. So when we're talking about a genotype, we're talking about the alleles present in that homologous pair, so that combination. When we're talking about a phenotype, we're talking about the trait that actually gets expressed, that you actually see like in real life if you try to observe the trait. So basically, we have dominant alleles and we have recessive alleles. A dominant allele, when it is present, will be expressed. And so when that dominant allele for a gene is expressed, we refer to it as showing the dominant phenotype. So in this previous example, right, if purple is our dominant allele, right, anytime we see a purple allele, so let's say that this big S means purple, anytime we see that dominant allele, we will see the dominant phenotype, which is purple, but it can also cover a recessive allele. So in this case, the little s is our recessive trait, our recessive allele, which is white flower color. So it's covered over when we have a copy of the dominant allele and a copy of the recessive allele, but we actually see it as visible when we have 2 copies of the recessive allele. Okay. So dominant phenotype can mask those recessive alleles for that same gene. We have names for the different combinations. So if we have 2 copies of the same allele, so the same version of that gene, we refer to it as homozygous. And you can have 2 copies of the dominant allele, leading to a homozygous dominant individual. You can have 2 copies of the recessive allele, giving us a homozygous recessive individual. Or you can have 1 copy of each, leading to a heterozygous individual. Okay. So whenever that dominant allele is present, you will see the dominant phenotype. So whether you have 2 copies of that dominant allele or 2 copies, or just 1 copy, you'll show the dominant phenotype. And only when you see 2 copies of the recessive allele will the recessive trait be shown. When we write these out, we try to pick a letter standing for something about the gene that it expresses. So in this example here on the right, it's talking about smooth seeds. So they've chosen S. And by convention, a capital letter means that trait is dominant, and a lowercase letter means that trait is recessive. Okay, so when you see these combinations of capital and lowercase letters, that's what that's referring to. Okay, so we're going to do 1 poll question, and I will send up out some information about what we're going to do to kind of get us caught up. But let's just do this quick poll. So if we say we have this code for flamingo pink hair and we have a recessive allele, when would we actually see that pink hair? Okay, I'm going to end the polling in a sec. Okay, great. So most people got this right. So it's only when we see these two copies of the recessive gene that we will see the recessive phenotype. And we know that by convention, the recessive gene, the recessive allele, is the lowercase one. Okay. So I will come up with a decision about what exactly we're going to do for Friday, and I'll send you guys an email in a second. So we're going to leave it for now. We'll actually end on time for once. If you still have stuff to do for the meiosis problem set, though, we've spent like 2 days on that, so you do need to make sure that you finish that up if you have not done so yet.